An Alaskan hunter accidentally went off trail deep in the forest when he suddenly spotted strange lights coming from the bushes. But then he froze in shock as he saw where the lights were coming from, realizing he wasn't alone out there. Why was there a hidden, self-built bunker so deep in the woods, and why was there a little girl, all alone with a man, in the middle of nowhere? Boaz Moshe adjusted the scope on his rifle as a gust of wind rustled through the pine trees overhead. At 50, he still had the keen eyes and steady hands of a hunter half his age, though the lines on his weathered face told stories of countless expeditions through the Alaskan wilderness. Late summer had always been his favorite time to hunt, that perfect window just before the official season when the forest was alive but not yet crowded with other hunters. The wilderness stretched around him in all directions, thick pine and birch trees creating a natural maze that had swallowed many inexperienced hikers over the years. The ground beneath his boots was damp, releasing that distinctive earthy scent that reminded him why he'd chosen this remote life. Moss-covered rocks and fallen logs created natural obstacles as he navigated the winding, unmarked trails. Boaz paused, his senses suddenly alert. Something had changed. The forest, normally alive with chirping birds and scurrying wildlife, had gone unusually quiet. He glanced upward through gaps in the canopy and noticed dark clouds gathering rapidly overhead. The air had shifted too, carrying the unmistakable smell of impending rain. A chill wind picked up, causing the branches above to sway and creak. "Storm's coming," he muttered to himself, checking his watch. It was later than he'd realized. The grey light filtering through the trees suggested sunset wasn't far off. He needed to get back to his cabin before darkness fell, or the rain began in earnest. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, Boaz turned to retrace his steps, but something felt off. The landmarks he'd been using to navigate, a distinctive birch tree with a split trunk, a cluster of boulders covered in emerald moss, weren't where they should be. He frowned, turning slowly in place, trying to orient himself. "Damn it," he breathed, the realization hitting him. He'd accidentally veered off the main trail, following what was probably a game path deeper into unfamiliar territory. It had been years since he'd lost his bearings like this. Back when he first moved to Alaska, maybe, but not recently. He reached into his pocket for his phone, hoping to check the GPS map he'd downloaded, but the screen showed no signal bars. This deep in the wilderness, surrounded by mountains, connectivity was a luxury he rarely enjoyed. "All right, back to basics," Boaz muttered, reaching into his backpack to retrieve an old brass compass, a reliable tool that had saved him more than once in his younger days. He held it level, watching the needle settle, and tried to recall which direction he'd been heading when he started his hunt. After a moment's consideration, he set off toward what he believed was southeast, where his original trail should be. The forest grew denser as he walked, unfamiliar terrain stretching before him. Low-hanging branches forced him to duck, and thick underbrush grabbed at his pants. The clouds continued to darken overhead, and the first distant rumble of thunder reached his ears. Just as frustration began to set in, a flicker of light caught his peripheral vision. Something unnatural. A warm glow coming from behind a thick patch of bushes about 50 yards to his right. Boaz frowned. He wasn't expecting to encounter anyone else out here, especially not with hunting season still a few days away and sunset approaching rapidly. Caution took over as he crouched lower, moving quietly toward the light source. Drawing closer, he carefully parted the bushes to get a better view. What he saw made him freeze in place. Nestled into a small hillside was what appeared to be a man-made structure, some sort of bunker or shelter, cleverly camouflaged beneath layers of brush, moss, and dirt. The entrance was low to the ground, just tall enough for an adult to crouch through, and almost entirely hidden from casual observation. Only someone who had stumbled within yards of it would notice the careful arrangement wasn't natural. A thin metal pipe emerged from the ground nearby, releasing a faint wisp of steam that dissipated quickly in the cool air. It looked like a ventilation shaft, suggesting the interior was actively occupied. As Boaz watched, his eyes traced subtle indentations in the soft ground around the entrance. Footprints. Small footprints that couldn't possibly belong to an adult. Child-sized impressions that led away from the bunker toward a nearby clearing. Following the direction of the tracks, Boaz spotted a small figure just 20 yards away. A little girl in a blue sweater and jeans, crouched near a patch of wildflowers. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. In her hands was what looked like a glass jar, and she appeared to be carefully placing items inside it. The sight immediately transported Boaz back 40 years, to hikes with his father through forests, much like this one, when young Boaz would fill his pockets with interesting rocks, unusual leaves, or the occasional beetle that caught his attention. The familiar scene brought an unexpected smile to his face. But the smile quickly faded as questions flooded his mind. What was a young girl doing alone in this remote wilderness? Where were her parents or guardian? And who had built this hidden bunker so far from any established trail or road? Boaz remained still, unsure whether to make his presence known. Before he could decide, the distinct sound of footsteps emerged from the direction of the bunker. Heavy boots crunched on pine needles as a man stepped out from the low entrance of the bunker, straightening up to his full height, somewhere around 6 feet. He appeared to be in his early 40s, perhaps 10 years younger than Boaz, with a lean, athletic build that suggested he was accustomed to physical activity. But it was his eyes that caught Boaz's attention, sharp and alert, constantly scanning the surroundings as if expecting danger from any direction. "Rayleigh," the man called out, his voice carrying through the still forest air. "Time to come inside." The little girl didn't look up from her collection, completely absorbed in examining what looked like a colorful stone she'd just discovered. "Rayleigh," the man called again, this time with more urgency. When she still didn't respond, he muttered something under his breath and began walking toward her. Boaz remained completely still in his hiding spot, barely breathing, but fate intervened. A loud crack of thunder rumbled overhead, startling both Boaz and the man. The man stopped abruptly, turning to scan the forest, and his gaze locked directly onto the spot where Boaz crouched in the bushes. For a moment, neither moved. The man's expression shifted from surprise to something harder, a protective instinct mixing with unmistakable suspicion. Without breaking eye contact with Boaz, he quickly strode to the little girl, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. The girl's head snapped up, looking first at the man, then in Boaz's general direction, before the man ushered her toward the bunker entrance. "Stay inside," Boaz heard him tell her firmly as she disappeared into the hidden doorway. Once the girl was safely inside, the man stepped away from the entrance and squared his shoulders, facing Boaz's hiding spot directly. "I can see you in the bushes," he called out, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Come out where I can see you. Now." Realizing concealment was no longer an option, Boaz slowly stood up, raising his empty hands slightly to show he meant no harm. He stepped carefully through the underbrush, approaching the man at a measured pace. "Who are you?" the man demanded as Boaz drew closer. His stance was defensive, shoulders tense. "What are you doing spying on my daughter?" Boaz stopped at a respectful distance. "I wasn't spying on anyone," he said, keeping his voice level. "Name's Boaz Moshe. I'm just a hunter who got turned around in these woods." The man's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "A hunter," he repeated, eyes flicking briefly to the rifle slung across Boaz's back. "That's right," Boaz confirmed. "I was tracking moose, veered off the main trail and got a bit lost. I was headed back when I spotted the light from your—" He hesitated, unsure what to call it. "Your place here. Didn't expect to find anyone this deep in the forest." The man studied him carefully, eyes moving from Boaz's face to his clothes, his boots, his rifle, as if cataloguing every detail. "Who sent you here?" he asked suddenly. The question caught Boaz off guard. "Nobody sent me. Like I said, I'm just a hunter. I'm alone." The man's expression remained skeptical, his posture still tense with suspicion. Recognizing the need to defuse the situation, Boaz slowly removed his backpack. "Look," he said, unzipping the main compartment. "I've got nothing but hunting gear. See for yourself." He opened the pack wide, revealing its contents. His bolt-action rifle was already visible on his back, But inside the pack were binoculars, a field knife, and several sealed plastic bags containing cleaned and skinned rabbit meat, his earlier catch of the day. A handheld GPS unit sat in a side pocket, useless without signal. "I was tracking moose," Boaz explained as the man cautiously examined the contents. "They prefer densely wooded areas near water, and I spotted fresh tracks earlier today. Followed them a bit too enthusiastically and lost my bearings when the forest thickened. That's how I ended up here." After a long moment, the man's shoulders relaxed slightly. Something in Boaz's explanation seemed to satisfy him, or at least diminish his immediate concern. "Fine," he said curtly. "You should go now." Boaz nodded, closing his backpack and slinging it over his shoulder again. The man had already turned away, clearly expecting Boaz to leave without further interaction. Something about this abrupt dismissal, combined with the hidden bunker and the young girl, triggered Boaz's instincts honed through years as a park ranger before he became a hunting guide. "Wait," Boaz called, causing the man to stop and turn back with visible reluctance. "There's a storm moving in fast. What are you and your daughter doing out here? Maybe we should all head back to civilization together." The man's expression hardened again. "We'll leave when we're ready, on our own." Boaz persisted, gesturing toward the concealed structure. "This bunker, is it yours? Are you allowed to have something like this out here? Most of this is protected forest land." The man froze momentarily, his jaw tightening. For a second, Boaz thought he might refuse to answer, or even become hostile. But after composing himself with visible effort, the man replied, "This is my property, actually. You're the one who's trespassing." He gestured toward the surrounding trees. "There are markers around the perimeter. You must have missed them." Boaz frowned, scanning the nearby tree line. He couldn't recall seeing any property markers, though he had been focused on his compass rather than looking for signs of private land. "I apologize for the misunderstanding," he said. "I didn't notice any markers. Guess I was too busy trying to find my way." The man nodded stiffly, seemingly satisfied with Boaz's apology, but the tension in the air remained palpable as dark clouds continued to gather overhead. "The markers are subtle," the man said, pointing toward several trees where small metal plates were indeed affixed at eye level. "Easy to miss if you're not looking for them." Boaz squinted at the nearest marker, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and skepticism. He'd been in these forests for years and knew most private holdings in the area. This remote location seemed an unusual spot for private property, but the markers appeared legitimate, if inconspicuous. "Again, I apologize for the intrusion," Boaz said with a slight nod. "I'll get out of your hair and find my own way back." He turned to leave, mentally plotting his route based on the compass readings he'd taken earlier. The first drops of rain began to spatter against the leaves overhead as the wind picked up. "Wait," the man called, surprising Boaz. When he turned back, the man appeared to be having some internal debate. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "Hold on. I have a map that might help you get back to the main trail. Wait here." Before Boaz could respond, the man crouched down and disappeared into the low entrance of the bunker. Through the partially open door, Boaz could hear muffled voices, the man speaking softly to the little girl, though the words were indistinct. After a minute, the man emerged holding a folded paper map. He approached Boaz and unfolded it, revealing a detailed topographical map of the surrounding wilderness. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone businesslike. "I've got a cabin up in the mountains," Boaz replied, pointing to the northeast. "Only one there, about 5 miles from here. My truck is parked at the Pine Creek trailhead." He indicated the location on the map. The man studied the map for a moment, then traced a route with his finger. "This is where we are now," he said, tapping a location that confirmed they were indeed on private property. A small rectangular parcel surrounded by national forest land. "Take this game trail east for about half a mile until you hit a creek. Follow it downstream for another mile, and you'll intersect with the main trail here. That'll take you straight to your parking spot." He folded the map and held it out to Boaz. "Take it." "That's generous, but I can remember the way," Boaz replied. "I used to be a park ranger years back. Once I know where I am, I'm good with directions." "Just take it," the man insisted, pressing the map toward him. "I don't want to see you wandering around here again." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Next time you come looking, I probably won't be here anyway." Something in the man's tone, a hint of resignation or perhaps premeditated departure, caught Boaz's attention. But with the rain beginning to fall more steadily and thunder rumbling closer, he decided not to press for explanations. "Appreciate it," Boaz said, accepting the map and tucking it into his jacket pocket. "Hope you and your daughter stay dry through this storm." The man merely nodded, already turning back toward the bunker entrance where he would presumably rejoin the little girl named Rayleigh. Boaz set off in the direction indicated on the map, the rain now falling heavily enough to penetrate the forest canopy. The game trail was exactly where the man had said it would be, a narrow path winding between trees and underbrush that deer and other wildlife had trampled into visibility. As he walked, Boaz mentally reviewed the encounter. Something felt off about the whole situation, but he couldn't quite place what it was. The man's initial hostility might be understandable. Finding a stranger near your home in the wilderness would make anyone cautious. And yet there was something in his eyes, in his manner, that suggested more than simple territorial protection. The little girl, too, Rayleigh, had seemed content enough, engrossed in her collecting activity like any child. But why bring a young child to such a remote location? And why stay in what appeared to be a hidden bunker, rather than a proper cabin, especially with a storm approaching? These questions accompanied Boaz as he followed the creek downstream, just as the map had directed. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking through his jacket despite the protection of the trees. Occasionally, flashes of lightning illuminated the forest, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Eventually, he reached the intersection with the main trail, exactly where the map had indicated. From here, the path was wide and well-worn, a route he'd traversed many times before. The familiarity was reassuring after his unexpected detour. Another 40 minutes of brisk walking brought him to the small clearing where he'd left his truck. The old Ford F-150 sat waiting, its dark green paint blending with the surrounding forest. Boaz hurried to unlock it, tossing his gear onto the passenger seat before climbing in himself, grateful to escape the downpour. As he started the engine and turned the heater to high, his thoughts returned to the strange bunker and its occupants. The drive home would take nearly an hour on the winding mountain roads, plenty of time to consider what he'd witnessed. The rain hammered against the windshield as Boaz navigated the narrow, winding road that led to his cabin. His wipers struggled to keep pace with the downpour, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the dense forest on either side of the road. Under normal circumstances, the drive would have been challenging enough, but his mind was preoccupied with thoughts of the bunker, the man, and the little girl. "Never gotten lost like that before," he muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel as his truck crawled up a particularly steep section of road. Not in years, anyway. The realization bothered him more than he cared to admit. Boaz had always prided himself on his sense of direction, his innate ability to navigate the wilderness. It was a skill that had served him well during his years as a park ranger, and later as a hunting guide leading clients through the Alaskan backcountry. "Maybe I am getting old," he said with a grimace, glancing at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than he remembered, his salt and pepper beard more salt than pepper these days. 5 years ago, he and Rose had made the decision to move to this remote cabin permanently, leaving behind the relative comforts of town life for the quiet solitude of the mountains. It had been the right choice, away from the noise, the crowds, the constant pressure to keep up with society's ever-accelerating pace. Here, life moved according to the rhythms of nature, not the ticking of a clock. Yet today's lapse in navigation skill had shaken him. Was this the first sign of decline? The beginning of a slow fade of the abilities he'd relied on his entire adult life? Nonsense, he told himself firmly as the cabin finally came into view. Just got distracted, that's all. Lost in thought, not lost in the woods. But even as he parked beside the cabin and gathered his gear, another thought nagged at him. The man in the bunker and his daughter. Why hadn't they left before the storm hit? Any experienced outdoorsman could have read the signs hours ago. The man had seemed capable enough. Surely he wouldn't risk keeping a child in a glorified hole in the ground during a thunderstorm. Unless, of course, they had nowhere else to go, or unless leaving would put them at greater risk than staying. None of my business, Boaz reminded himself, though the protective instinct that had served him well as a ranger continued to sound internal alarms. The cabin stood stalwart against the storm, its sturdy log walls and metal roof a testament to his and Rose's hard work over the years. Light glowed from the windows, a warm beacon guiding him home. Boaz grabbed his backpack and rifle, then made a dash for the front porch, boots splashing through puddles that had already formed in the yard. As he pushed open the door, shaking rain from his jacket, the familiar scent of home enveloped him. Wood smoke from the fireplace, the lingering aroma of Rose's cooking, and the pine-scented candles she kept burning during storm season. Rose stood up from her chair at the dining table, relief washing over her face. At 57, she remained as beautiful to him as the day they'd met, her silver-streaked auburn hair framing a face that had weathered life's challenges without losing its warmth. "There you are," she said, crossing the room to help him with his gear. "I was starting to worry." "Storm caught me off guard," he replied, hanging his soaked jacket on a hook by the door. Rose glanced at his empty hands. "Empty-handed today?" Boaz removed his vest and hat, hanging them beside his jacket. He shook his head, exhaustion settling into his bones after the long day in the forest. "No moose, but I did bag a few rabbits earlier." He reached into his pack and pulled out the plastic bags containing the cleaned rabbit meat. Rose took the packages, examining them with an appreciative nod. "I'll get these into the kitchen. You look like you could use a hot drink." As she disappeared into the adjoining kitchen, Boaz sank into his favorite armchair near the fireplace, where flames danced cheerfully behind the glass door of the wood stove. Thunder crashed outside, and rain pummeled the metal roof, creating a cacophony that somehow managed to be both dramatic and soothing. He poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table and took a long drink, then called to Rose in the kitchen. "Got turned around out there today," he admitted. "Been a long time since I lost my bearings in those woods." Rose appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "You? Lost? That's not like you at all." Boaz shrugged, trying to appear more casual than he felt. "Had my compass, found my way eventually. Just took longer than it should have." He hesitated, then added, "Makes me wonder if I'm starting to lose my edge. Getting old, maybe." Rose walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "One misstep doesn't mean you're losing anything. Everyone has off days, even the great Boaz Moshe." Her teasing tone brought a reluctant smile to his face. "Besides," she continued, "your instincts have always been your real strength. Your sense of direction is just a tool." Her words reassured him, as they often did. Rose had always known exactly what to say. "There's something else," Boaz said, his expression growing serious. "I found a bunker out there while I was trying to find my way back, hidden in the hillside, almost invisible unless you're right on top of it. Man and a little girl inside." Rose's eyebrows rose. "A bunker, like a survival shelter?" "More elaborate than that," Boaz replied. "Had ventilation, proper construction. Man claimed it was on his private property, showed me markers I'd supposedly missed, gave me a map to find my way out." "That seems unusual," Rose said carefully. "What were they doing way out there with a storm coming?" Before Boaz could respond, a particularly violent crash of thunder shook the cabin, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging them into sudden darkness, save for the glow from the wood stove. "Damn," Rose muttered. There was a sharp intake of breath from the kitchen, followed by her voice calling out, "Cut myself." The knife slipped when the lights went out. "Don't move," Boaz instructed, already on his feet. "It's dark in there. I'll get the generator going first, then we'll take care of your hand." He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer in the side table and made his way to the back door. "Power lines probably came down in the storm. Generator should get us through until they're repaired." The rain was still coming down in sheets as Boaz dashed across the yard to the storage shed, where they kept their backup generator. Inside, protected from the elements, the machine sat ready for exactly this situation. He checked the fuel gauge, still 3/4 full from the last maintenance check, and started the ignition sequence. The generator coughed twice, then rumbled to life, its steady mechanical hum a reassuring sound in the storm-tossed night. Within moments, lights blinked on inside the cabin, visible through the shed's small window. Boaz hurried back inside, finding Rose at the kitchen sink, holding her bleeding finger under a stream of water that had now resumed flowing through their electric pump system. "Let me see," he said, taking her hand gently in his. The cut wasn't deep, but it was bleeding steadily, a clean slice across the pad of her index finger. "Raise your arm above your heart," he instructed, guiding her to sit at the kitchen table while he retrieved their first aid kit from beneath the sink. With practiced efficiency, he cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic and wrapped it in a bandage. "You'll live," he pronounced with a small smile, which she returned despite the pain. "I'll finish up in here," Boaz said, looking at the half-prepared rabbit meat on the cutting board. "You just rest that hand for a bit." Rose nodded gratefully, and Boaz set to work portioning the meat, some for the refrigerator, some to be salted for preservation, and some for their dinner tonight. He moved to the stove and stirred the pot of stew Rose had started earlier, adding chunks of fresh rabbit meat to simmer in the rich broth. As he worked, the image of the little girl in the blue sweater collecting treasures in her jar kept returning to his mind. Something about her, about the entire situation, refused to let go of him. The stew bubbled contentedly on the stove as Boaz ladled generous portions into 2 ceramic bowls. The rich aroma of herbs, vegetables, and freshly added rabbit meat filled the small kitchen, creating a stark contrast to the wild storm still raging outside. He placed the bowls on their worn wooden dining table, where Rose sat waiting with 2 glasses of water already poured. "How's the finger?" Boaz asked, settling into his chair across from her. Rose flexed her bandaged finger carefully, still throbbing a bit, but the bleeding stopped. She picked up her spoon with her uninjured hand. "Thank you for finishing dinner." Boaz nodded, blowing gently on a spoonful of steaming stew. "Your recipe did most of the work. I just added the meat." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the clinking of spoons against bowls and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. The generator hummed steadily outside, maintaining their bubble of warmth and light amid nature's fury. "You know," Rose said after a while, "we really are getting older." Boaz looked up, caught off guard by the candid observation. "This year marks our official entry into our 60s, she continued, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "We've earned every grey hair and creaky joint." "Speak for yourself," Boaz replied with a mock scowl that quickly melted into a rueful smile. "But I suppose you're right. Can't outrun time." "Good thing our son is doing so well in the city," Rose said, her eyes bright with maternal pride. "Michael's established himself with that engineering firm, got that nice apartment downtown, gives us the freedom to enjoy our retirement out here without worrying about him." Boaz nodded, feeling the familiar surge of pride that accompanied thoughts of their son. Michael had inherited his father's practical mind and his mother's gentle determination, combining them into a success neither of them could have imagined for themselves. "We raised him right," Boaz agreed. "He can handle himself in that concrete jungle while we enjoy the real one." Their conversation drifted to memories of Michael's childhood, camping trips, fishing expeditions, the time he'd caught his first salmon. But Boaz's mind kept tugging back to the little girl he'd seen earlier that day. Something about her had awakened a protective instinct in him, one he hadn't felt so strongly since Michael was young. "You know," Boaz said, setting down his spoon, "I didn't get a chance to tell you everything about that bunker I found today." Rose looked up, interest piqued. "There was a little girl there," he continued, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a blue jacket. "When I first spotted her, she was crouched on the ground, collecting things, rocks, leaves, insects maybe, and putting them in a jar. Like Michael used to do," Rose said softly. Exactly what I thought, Boaz nodded. What struck me as odd was that the man, her father I assume, didn't seem in any hurry to get her home, despite the approaching storm. The bunker's ventilation had just been turned on, like they'd only recently arrived or planned to stay despite the weather. Rose's brow furrowed. That does sound strange. No one should keep a child out in this kind of weather if they have any alternative. The man called her Rayleigh, Boaz added. I remember that distinctly. At the mention of the name, Rose's expression changed. She abruptly stood up from the table and walked to the armchair near the fireplace, where a stack of newspapers sat on a side table. She rifled through them, searching for something specific. What is it? Boaz asked, watching her with curiosity. I remember reading something. Rose muttered, pulling out a newspaper that appeared to be several weeks old. She returned to the table, spreading it open with her good hand. Here, look at this. Boaz leaned forward, squinting at the article she indicated. The headline read, Child missing in Alaska. Authorities seek public assistance. Below it was a photograph of a smiling young girl and details about her disappearance. Rayleigh Winston, Boaz read aloud, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He quickly scanned the article, absorbing the key details. The girl had been reported missing by a neighbor who had been taking care of her while her grandmother was hospitalized. The last person seen with her, according to witnesses, was a man believed to be her estranged father. Rayleigh, Boaz repeated, looking up at Rose with growing alarm. That's what he called her. The girl in the blue jacket. Rose's face paled. It can't be a coincidence, can it? Not with the same unusual name. The man was protective, suspicious, Boaz said, memories of the encounter taking on new, disturbing significance. Wanted to know who sent me, seemed ready to run if necessary. If that's the same girl, Rose said quietly, then she's been missing for weeks. Boaz stood up abruptly, his dinner forgotten. We need to call the police now. Rose and Boaz abandoned their half-eaten dinner, the steaming bowls of stew left cooling on the table, as they moved with urgent purpose. Rose reached for the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall, one of the few reliable forms of communication in their remote location, while Boaz double-checked the details in the newspaper article. Rayleigh Winston, age 8, he read aloud, confirming what they already suspected. Last seen 3 weeks ago in Fairbanks with an unidentified male believed to be her estranged father, Raymond Winston. Reported missing by neighbor Elaine Donovan, who was caring for her while grandmother Margaret Winston was hospitalized for pneumonia. The article included a school photograph of Rayleigh, a smiling girl with freckles and bright eyes that matched the child Boaz had seen collecting treasures in the forest. I'm dialing now, Rose said, punching in numbers with her uninjured hand. While they waited for the call to connect, Boaz paced the small living area. The man gave me a map, he remembered suddenly. I can show the police exactly where the bunker is located. Rose nodded, then held up her hand for silence as someone answered on the other end. Yes, hello. This is Rose Mosher calling from Cabin 8 on Pine Ridge Road. My husband and I need to report information about a missing child. She paused, listening to the response. Yes, that's right, Rayleigh Winston. My husband believes he encountered her today in the wilderness northeast of Pine Creek Trailhead. Another pause. No, we're certain. He saw her with a man in a hidden bunker in the forest. The man called her Rayleigh. She glanced at Boaz, who nodded encouragingly. We have a newspaper with her photo and it matches the girl my husband saw. We think this is serious and needs immediate attention. Rose listened for a moment longer, then covered the mouthpiece with her hand. They're sending officers out right away. Should be here in about 30 minutes, weather permitting. Boaz nodded, relief mingling with a growing sense of urgency. 30 minutes felt like an eternity when a child's safety might be at stake. Did you tell them I can lead them to the location? Rose uncovered the mouthpiece. My husband can guide your officers to the exact location. He was there just hours ago. She paused again. Yes, we understand. We'll be waiting. She hung up the phone and turned to Boaz. They're taking this very seriously. Said there's been an active search for Rayleigh since she disappeared. Good, Boaz said, moving to the window to peer out at the storm. The rain had eased somewhat, though occasional flashes of lightning still illuminated the forest surrounding their cabin. I hope this weather doesn't slow them down. They'll get here, Rose assured him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. You did the right thing, Boaz. You may have just saved that little girl. Boaz nodded, though a weight of responsibility had settled onto his shoulders. I just hope I'm not too late. If that man realizes I've figured out who they are. He didn't finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. The 30 minutes stretched into 40 as the storm periodically intensified, but finally, headlights cut through the darkness outside, followed by the distinctive red and blue lights of police vehicles pulling up beside the cabin. Boaz opened the door before they could knock, ushering in 2 officers in rain-slicked coats, a tall, broad-shouldered sergeant with a weathered face and a younger deputy with alert eyes that immediately began scanning the cabin interior. Mr. and Mrs. Moshe, the sergeant asked, removing his rain-soaked hat. I'm Sergeant Thompson, Alaska State Troopers. This is Deputy Garcia. We understand you have information about Rayleigh Winston. That's right, Boaz confirmed, gesturing for them to come further inside. I encountered her earlier today, though I didn't realize who she was until after I got home, and my wife showed me the newspaper article. The officers moved to the dining table where the newspaper lay open. Deputy Garcia took out a notebook, while Sergeant Thompson studied the article, then looked up at Boaz. Tell us exactly what you saw, Mr. Moshe. Every detail could be important. Boaz recounted the entire experience, getting lost in the woods, discovering the camouflaged bunker, spotting Rayleigh collecting items in her jar, and the subsequent interaction with the man who claimed to be on private property. He was protective, suspicious, Boaz explained. Wanted to know who sent me, like he expected someone might be looking for him. When I mentioned the bunker, he got defensive, claimed it was on his property, and showed me markers I supposedly missed. And you're certain the man called the girl Rayleigh? Thompson asked. Absolutely, Boaz affirmed. He called out to her twice. She didn't respond the first time, so he went to her, and that's when he spotted me. Can you describe the man? Garcia asked, pen poised over his notebook. Boaz closed his eyes briefly, recalling the encounter. Around 40, I'd guess, fit, moved like someone used to physical activity. About 6 feet tall, short brown hair, sharp features. Sharp eyes, too, observant, cautious. Wore outdoor clothes, the kind you'd see on any experienced hiker or hunter. Nothing distinctive. Thompson nodded, exchanging a glance with Garcia. Sounds like it could be Raymond Winston. He's an ex-military, divorced from Rayleigh's mother, who passed away 2 years ago. Grandmother got custody due to his unstable living situation. He disappeared around the same time Rayleigh went missing. I kept the map he gave me, Boaz said, retrieving it from his jacket pocket. I can show you exactly where the bunker is located. Thompson took the map, examining it carefully. This is excellent, Mr. Moshe. We'll organize a search team immediately. I want to come with you, Boaz said firmly. I know those woods better than most, and I've been to the location directly. In the dark, with the storm, you'll need someone who's seen it firsthand. The sergeant hesitated, weighing the offer against protocol. Normally, we wouldn't involve civilians in an operation like this, but given your experience as a former park ranger and your familiarity with the specific location. He looked to Garcia, who nodded slightly. All right, you can accompany us to the search staging area. We'll assess the situation from there. I'm coming too, Rose stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mrs. Moshe, Thompson began. I'll stay at the staging area or in the vehicle, she clarified, but I'm not staying here alone wondering what's happening. Thompson seemed about to object further, but Boaz interjected. My wife is as stubborn as she is smart, Sergeant. Trust me when I say it's easier to have her where we can see her than try to make her stay behind. A fleeting smile crossed Thompson's face. Very well. Both of you grab whatever gear you need for potentially severe weather. We're moving out in 5 minutes. As the officers stepped outside to radio in their findings and coordinate the search operation, Boaz and Rose quickly gathered rain gear, flashlights, and extra layers of clothing. "Be careful out there," Rose said quietly, helping Boaz check his equipment. "That man is desperate if he's hiding a kidnapped child in a bunker in the middle of nowhere." "I will," Boaz promised, zipping up his waterproof jacket. "With any luck, we'll have Rayleigh safe before morning." They stepped out into the rain, locking the cabin behind them, and climbed into the back of Thompson's police SUV. As they pulled away from the cabin, Boaz couldn't help but feel that the events of this strange day were far from over. The Wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless rain as Sergeant Thompson's SUV led a small convoy of vehicles along the winding forest road. Boaz sat in the back seat, leaning forward occasionally to provide directions as they approached the Pine Creek trailhead where he'd left his truck earlier that day. "There," he said, pointing through the windshield at a small gravel parking area now occupied by several official vehicles. "That's where the main trail begins." Thompson pulled alongside a command vehicle where officers in rain gear huddled around maps spread under a hastily erected canopy. Despite the late hour, the area bustled with activity. Search and rescue personnel checking equipment, K9 handlers preparing their dogs, and a helicopter crew performing pre-flight checks on their craft parked in a clearing nearby. "Impressive response time," Boaz commented as they exited the vehicle, rain immediately pelting their hooded jackets. "Missing child cases get top priority," Thompson replied grimly, "especially when we have a credible sighting after weeks of searching." They joined the group under the canopy, where a stern-faced woman in a trooper's uniform was directing operations. Thompson introduced her as Captain Larson, the incident commander for the search. "Mr. Moshe," she acknowledged with a curt nod, "I understand you've seen both the girl and the suspect today." "That's right," Boaz confirmed. "I can show you the exact location of the bunker on your maps." He spread out the hand-drawn map the man had given him alongside the official search grid. Using both, he pinpointed the bunker's location, a remote area approximately 3 miles from the trailhead, well off any marked paths. "It's here," he said, tapping the spot, "hidden in a small hillside entrance facing east, almost invisible unless you're right on top of it. There's a ventilation pipe that might be visible from above if your helicopter has thermal imaging." Captain Larson studied the location, comparing it with their previous search patterns. "We've had teams through that general area twice before, but if this bunker is as well concealed as you describe, they could have missed it." She turned to her team. "We'll approach from multiple directions. Ground teams from the east and south, K9 units from the west. Helicopter will provide aerial support and thermal imaging if weather permits." A weather specialist stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've got a brief window of improved conditions coming up. Rain's easing temporarily, and wind speeds are decreasing. Might be our best chance for air support." Larson nodded. "Then we move now. Everyone gear up and move out in 5 minutes." She turned to Boaz. "Mr. Moshe, you'll accompany Sergeant Thompson's team to guide them in. You follow their lead and stay behind them at all times, understood?" "Understood," Boaz agreed. Rose, who had been standing quietly nearby, approached him. "Be careful," she said, squeezing his arm. "I'll wait here at the command post." The helicopter crew signaled they were ready, and Boaz watched as the massive machine's rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then building to a deafening whir that sent ripples through the puddles all around them. Equipped with a radio, tactical vest, and accompanied by Thompson and 3 other officers, Boaz led the team into the forest. Powerful flashlights cut through the darkness as they navigated the initial section of the main trail before veering off toward the bunker's location. The going was difficult. The same trail that had been merely damp under Boaz's boots that afternoon was now a muddy quagmire. Fallen branches from the storm created obstacles, and several times they had to detour around newly formed washouts where the trail had eroded. Above them, the helicopter's searchlight occasionally penetrated the canopy, its powerful beams sweeping the forest ahead. The radio on Thompson's belt crackled with updates from the other teams and the aircraft overhead. "This is Air 1, came a voice through the static. "We're over the search grid now. Limited visibility through the canopy, but thermal imaging is operational. No significant heat signatures detected yet. Thompson acknowledged the update as they pressed forward. Despite the helicopter's presence, the forest felt eerily silent between bursts of radio chatter, as if holding its breath. "We're getting close," Boaz said after nearly an hour of challenging hiking. "Should be just beyond that ridge." As they crested the small rise, a flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, followed almost immediately by a tremendous crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "That was close," one of the officers muttered, glancing nervously at the sky. The radio came to life again, this time with urgency. "All ground teams, this is Air 1. We've got a severe cell moving in rapidly from the northwest, wind speeds increasing to dangerous levels. We're being forced to return to base." Thompson grabbed the radio. "Copy that, Air 1. What's our window?" "Minutes, not hours," came the grim reply. "This cell is moving fast and it's packing lightning. Get to cover if you can." Captain Larson's voice followed. "All teams abort search operations immediately. Return to base. I repeat, abort search operations. Safety protocols are now in effect." Boaz felt his heart sink as Thompson turned to him with a resigned expression. "You heard the captain. We have to turn back." "We can't," Boaz protested, pointing ahead. "We're less than half a mile from the bunker. That little girl is right there." "And she'll still be there when the weather clears," Thompson countered firmly. "We're not risking the lives of this entire team in a lightning storm. The suspect likely won't move in this weather either." "You don't know that," Boaz argued, voice rising in frustration. "If he realizes we're onto him, he could disappear with her again, and next time we might not find them at all." As if to punctuate his concern, the sky erupted with another blinding flash, followed by a deafening boom that seemed to split the air itself. Rain, which had briefly lightened, now returned with vengeful force, driven by gusting winds that bent the treetops. "That's it, we're pulling back," Thompson declared, no longer willing to debate. "Captain's orders, Mr. Moshe. We're heading back to base now." The disappointment and frustration were bitter in Boaz's mouth as he reluctantly turned to follow the retreating officers. The helicopter's distant thrumming had already faded as it escaped the approaching storm front. The trek back seemed twice as long and 3 times as difficult, with the trail now transformed into rushing streams in places. By the time they emerged at the command post, all of them were soaked despite their rain gear, mud-splattered and disheartened. Rose met Boaz with a thermos of hot coffee and concern in her eyes. "The weather turned so quickly," she said. "They're saying it might be the worst storm cell they've seen this season." "We were so close," Boaz replied, the disappointment evident in his voice. "So damn close." Captain Larson approached, her expression professionally neutral despite the setback. "We'll resume the search as soon as conditions allow, Mr. Moshe. Your assistance has been invaluable in narrowing our search area." "That little girl needs help now," Boaz said, unable to hide his frustration. "Every hour she remains with her kidnapper is an hour our teams are planning and preparing," Larson interrupted firmly. "I understand your concern, but I won't risk my people's lives unnecessarily. The moment this weather gives us a window, we'll be back out there in force." She turned to Thompson. "Get Mr. and Mrs. Moshe back to their cabin. We'll call when we're ready to resume operations." Thompson nodded and gestured toward his vehicle. "Come on, Boaz, there's nothing more we can do tonight." The drive back to the cabin was largely silent, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of the wipers and the occasional rumble of thunder. Boaz stared out the window at the rain-swept forest, his mind still with the little girl in the blue sweater, who remained beyond their reach for now. As Thompson's SUV pulled up beside their cabin, the sergeant turned to face them. "Try to get some rest. I'll radio the moment we're greenlit to resume the search, even if it's the middle of the night." Boaz nodded, his expression grim as he and Rose dashed through the rain to their front door. The sound of the police vehicle's tires on gravel faded as Thompson drove away, leaving them alone once more with their thoughts and the endless patter of rain on the roof. Inside their cabin, Rose stoked the wood stove while Boaz changed out of his sodden clothes. The warmth slowly pushed back against the chill that had settled into his bones during the aborted search operation. He emerged from the bedroom in dry flannel and heavy wool socks, a towel still draped around his neck from drying his hair. "Here," Rose said, pressing a mug of hot tea into his hands. "You need to warm up from the inside, too." Boaz accepted gratefully, wrapping his fingers around the ceramic mug and inhaling the steam. "Thanks." They settled into their respective armchairs facing the stove, the dancing flames visible through its glass door, casting flickering shadows across the cabin's interior. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling through the treetops and rain drumming steadily on the roof. "I can't stop thinking about her, Rose," Boaz said after a long silence. "That little girl out there in this weather, in a hole in the ground with a man who took her from her family." "I know," Rose replied softly. "It's heartbreaking." "We were so close." Frustration edged his voice. "Another 20 minutes and we would have reached the bunker." Rose studied him over the rim of her own mug. "Boaz Moshe, I know that look in your eye. Don't even think about it." "Think about what?" he asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. "Taking matters into your own hands," she said firmly. "The police are handling this. They'll resume the search as soon as the weather permits." Boaz set his mug down with more force than necessary. "And what if that's too late? What if he moves her somewhere else? We might never find her again." "And what if you go charging into the forest alone in this storm and get yourself killed?" Rose countered, her voice rising slightly. "How would that help anyone?" The direct challenge gave him pause. Rose rarely raised her voice, and when she did, Boaz knew to pay attention. "The police are right about one thing," she continued more calmly. "That man isn't going anywhere in this weather either. It's not safe for anyone to be moving through those woods right now, including him." Boaz sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "You're probably right." "The forest will be the safest place for him to hide," Rose reasoned. "And with this storm, it wouldn't be easy to move a child somewhere else overnight. As soon as this passes, the police will have the area surrounded." The logic in her argument gradually penetrated his frustration. Boaz nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "First light, then." "If the storm passes, they'll go back out at first light." "Or sooner," Rose added. "The sergeant said he'd call as soon as they're ready, even in the middle of the night." They lapsed into contemplative silence, listening to the storm's fury gradually diminishing outside. The initial thunderstorm was passing, though rain continued to fall steadily. "Who do you think they are?" Rose asked after a while. "The girl and the man. Do you think he really is her father?" Boaz reached for the newspaper article still lying on the dining table. "According to this, Raymond Winston is her biological father, lost custody to the grandmother after the mother died." He scanned the text. "Neighbor who reported her missing says a man matching his description picked her up from the house while the grandmother was in the hospital." "Poor child," Rose murmured, "to lose her mother and then be taken from her grandmother too." Boaz continued reading. "Doesn't say much about other family, just that she's been living with her grandmother Margaret since her mother's death 2 years ago." "What kind of man takes his own daughter and hides her in a bunker in the wilderness?" Rose wondered aloud, shaking her head. "What was he planning to do?" Boaz had no answer, only more questions spinning through his mind. The entire situation felt wrong, twisted by motives he couldn't begin to understand. What drives a man to such extremes? What did he hope to gain by isolating a child in the depths of the Alaskan forest? "I need to clean my gears and then I'll check on the generator soon," he said eventually, standing up. "The main lines have probably come back online." "Don't forget to switch it back to main power when you're done," Rose reminded him, rising as well. "I'm going to bed. Try not to stay up all night worrying about things we can't control." She kissed his cheek gently. "Tomorrow is another day and that little girl will be found. You've already done more than most would by spotting her in the first place." Boaz nodded, appreciating her attempt to ease his conscience. "I'll be in soon. Just need to switch the power and check that everything's secure." "Good night," Rose said, heading toward their bedroom. "And Boaz? Thank you for caring so much. It's one of the things I've always loved about you." With that, she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Boaz alone with his thoughts and the gradually calming storm outside. Hours slipped by as Boaz occupied himself with small tasks around the cabin, cleaning his rifle for the second time that day, reorganizing his backpack, and checking that all his gear was in proper order for whatever tomorrow might bring. The busy work kept his hands occupied, if not his mind, which continued to circle back to Rayleigh Winston and her captor. The intensity of the storm had diminished significantly, he noted, pausing to listen to the now gentle patter of rain against the windows. The thunder had moved on, leaving only occasional distant rumbles to suggest its continuing journey across the mountains. Glancing at the clock on the mantel, Boaz was surprised to see it was well past midnight. He was about to follow Rose to bed when he remembered the generator still humming away behind the cabin, using precious fuel when it might no longer be necessary. He stepped onto the back porch, relieved to find the rain had subsided to a light drizzle. The air felt cleansed, carrying the rich scent of wet pine and damp earth. Navigating by flashlight, Boaz made his way to the storage shed where the generator continued its steady mechanical rhythm. The fuel gauge showed plenty remaining. They'd kept it well maintained for exactly these kinds of emergencies. Boaz flipped the switch to return power to the main electrical lines, and after a brief flicker the cabin lights stabilized, indicating normal service had been restored. As he was about to shut off the generator completely, something caught his attention. A sound that didn't belong, the crunch of tires on wet gravel, coming from the front of the cabin. Boaz froze, listening intently. They weren't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. Could it be the police returning with news about the search? But there were no flashing lights, no official announcement of their presence. Setting down the flashlight, Boaz picked up a spade leaning against the shed wall. It wasn't his rifle, but it would serve as a weapon if necessary. He moved cautiously around the side of the cabin, staying close to the shadows until he could see the front yard. A car he didn't recognize was parked several yards from his cabin, a dark sedan, its engine off, headlights extinguished. In the pale moonlight that now broke through thinning clouds, Boaz could make out a solitary figure standing near his front porch, seemingly hesitating before approaching the door. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the silhouette. It was the man from the bunker. Boaz tightened his grip on the spade, mind racing. The girl wasn't visible. Was she still in the car, or had he left her somewhere else? How had he found the cabin? Then Boaz remembered, during their encounter in the forest, he'd mentioned where he lived, pointing vaguely in the direction of his cabin up in the mountain, the only one there. The man took a step toward the front door, and Boaz emerged from the shadows, spade held ready. "Can I help you?" he called, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his system. The man spun toward him, visibly startled. Even in the poor light, Boaz could see it was indeed the same person, Raymond Winston, if the police were correct. I came for my map," the man said after a moment's hesitation. "You told me where you lived earlier, and I've been looking for your cabin. Glad I found the right place." Boaz maintained his distance, sizing up the situation. Winston appeared to be alone, his clothes damp from the recent rain. There was no sign of Rayleigh. "Your map," Boaz repeated, keeping his tone neutral while his mind worked through the implications. The map had been given to the police. There was no way to produce it even if he wanted to. More importantly, why would the man trek through a stormy night just to retrieve a simple hand-drawn map he claimed not to need? Something didn't add up, and Boaz's instincts were sending warning signals. He needed to buy time, perhaps get to a phone and alert the police that their suspect had just walked right up to his front door. "I'll get it for you," Boaz said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Wait here a moment." Winston shifted his weight, glancing toward the dark sedan and back. "Actually, I'm soaked from the rain. Mind if I come inside while you look for it?" Boaz hesitated, studying the man from head to toe. His clothes did indeed look drenched, water dripping from his jacket onto the ground beneath him. Despite his misgivings, Boaz realized letting him inside might be the safest option. It would keep him in one place while Boaz figured out how to contact the authorities. "All right," he agreed reluctantly, lowering the spade slightly but keeping it in hand as he led the way to the front door. Inside, the cabin's warm light revealed Winston more clearly, his hair plastered to his head from the rain, his expression tense despite his attempts at casual conversation. "Have a seat," Boaz offered, indicating the living room chair furthest from both exits. "I'll just go find that map for you." Without waiting for a response, Boaz moved quickly toward the bedroom where Rose was sleeping. He closed the door behind him and crossed to the bedside, placing a hand gently but urgently on her shoulder. "Rose," he whispered, rousing her from sleep. "Wake up. The man from the bunker is in our living room." Rose's eyes flew open, instantly alert. "What? How?" "No time," Boaz cut her off. "He came for the map, but that's just an excuse. I need you to call the police while I keep him occupied. Tell them Raymond Winston is here. And don't come out of this room, understand?" Rose nodded, already reaching for the phone on the nightstand. Boaz squeezed her hand once, then returned to the living room, carefully composing his features to betray nothing of the alarm he felt. "Sorry," he said, emerging empty-handed. "Having trouble finding it. Thought it might be in my jacket, but it's not there. Might be in the truck." Winston had risen from the chair and was standing tensely in the middle of the room. His eyes flickered briefly to the newspaper article still visible on the dining table, the one about Rayleigh's disappearance. "Actually," he said, his voice hardening, "I'm not here for the map." The shift in tone was immediate and unmistakable. The pretense had dropped, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "I heard the police helicopter earlier this evening," Winston continued, taking a step forward, "hovering right over my bunker. You're the only one who knew where it was." Boaz maintained his calm exterior, though his mind was racing. How long would it take for Rose's call to bring help? How long could he keep this situation from escalating? "I didn't know what was going on when I met you earlier," Boaz said truthfully. "Only figured it out after I got home and saw the newspaper." Winston's eyes darted to the article again on top of the dining table, narrowing as he processed this information. "So you did report me." "Where's Rayleigh now?" Boaz asked, deliberately changing the subject, hoping to keep him talking until help arrived. "Not your problem," Winston snapped, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a handgun. "I didn't come here to talk." The sight of the weapon changed everything. Boaz's mind flashed to his rifle mounted on the wall nearby, within reach if he moved quickly enough. "Look," Boaz said, raising his hands slightly, "we can work this out. No one needs to get hurt." In the distance, very faintly, came the sound Boaz had been hoping for. Police sirens, growing gradually louder as they approached along the mountain road. Winston heard it too. His eyes widened, then narrowed with fury and betrayal. Without warning, he raised the gun and fired. Boaz's years of hunting had honed his reflexes to razor sharpness. The moment Winston's arm began to move, Boaz dropped and rolled across the floor, the bullet embedding itself in the wall behind where he had stood. In one fluid motion, he came up near the rifle mounted on the wall bracket, grabbed it, and brought it to bear. Winston was already bolting for the door, yanking it open and plunging into the night. From the doorway, Boaz took careful aim at the fleeing man's vehicle, specifically targeting the front tire. He squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report thunderous in the quiet night. The bullet found its mark, and the tire exploded with a satisfying hiss of escaping air. But Winston didn't head for his car. Instead, he veered off into the surrounding forest, disappearing into the darkness beyond the yard. The police sirens were much closer now, but Boaz knew they might arrive too late if Winston escaped into the vast wilderness he knew so well. Making a split-second decision, he grabbed his flashlight from the hook by the door and set off in pursuit, his rifle at the ready. "Winston," he shouted into the dark forest, "give it up! The police are almost here. Don't make this worse for yourself." The only response was the rustle of underbrush as his quarry pushed deeper into the woods. Boaz followed, using his flashlight to illuminate the damp ground, searching for footprints in the soft soil. Years of tracking animals had made him adept at following signs most would miss. A bent twig here, a displaced stone there, the subtle compression of moss where a boot had recently trod. The sirens reached the cabin behind him, blue and red lights flickering through the trees, but Boaz pressed on. He couldn't let Winston escape, not when they were so close to rescuing Rayleigh. A twig snapped somewhere to his left, and Boaz swung his light in that direction, momentarily illuminating a figure ducking behind a large pine. "I see you," Boaz called. "It's over, Winston. Come out with your hands up." Instead of surrender, the response came in the form of another gunshot. The bullet whizzed past Boaz's left arm, tearing through his sleeve and grazing his skin. He felt the sting but ignored it, dropping to one knee to present a smaller target and raising his rifle. "Last chance," Boaz warned, scanning the darkness for movement. Suddenly, Winston burst from behind the tree, charging directly at Boaz with his gun raised. In that critical moment, Boaz's hunting instincts took over. He aimed not to kill, but to incapacitate, squeezing the trigger and sending a bullet into Winston's thigh. The impact knocked the man to the ground with a cry of pain. His gun flew from his hand, landing several feet away in the underbrush. Boaz was on him in seconds, kicking the fallen weapon further out of reach and pointing his rifle directly at Winston's chest. "Don't move," Boaz commanded. "Police!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Over here!" Flashlight beams soon cut through the darkness as officers converged on their position, weapons drawn. Boaz stepped back, allowing them to secure Winston, who lay clutching his bleeding leg and glaring with undisguised hatred. "He's armed," Boaz informed them, indicating the direction where Winston's gun had fallen. "The weapon's over there in the brush." As one officer located and secured the gun, another approached Boaz. "You're bleeding, sir." Boaz glanced at his arm, noticing for the first time the tear in his flannel shirt and the blood seeping through. "Just a graze," he said dismissively. "Is Rose okay?" "Your wife is fine," the officer assured him. "She's with Sergeant Thompson back at the cabin." Relief washed over Boaz as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the stinging pain in his arm. He watched as the officers handcuffed Winston and helped him to his feet, applying pressure to his wounded leg. "Did you find ID on him?" Boaz asked. The officer nodded. "Raymond Winston. Matches the description of the father who abducted Rayleigh Winston 3 weeks ago." "Where's the girl?" Boaz demanded, addressing Winston directly. "Where's Rayleigh?" Winston said nothing, his face a mask of defiant silence as the officers began leading him back toward the cabin. Boaz followed, his rifle now pointed safely at the ground, his flashlight illuminating the path back. One question consumed his thoughts. If Raymond Winston was here, where was Rayleigh? "Where is she?" Boaz demanded again as they emerged from the forest into the yard, where several police vehicles now sat with their lights flashing. "What have you done with Rayleigh?" Winston maintained his stony silence, wincing as the officers helped him limp toward one of the waiting cruisers. Blood had soaked through his pant leg, but the officers had applied a field tourniquet to control the bleeding from the gunshot wound. Sergeant Thompson strode forward to meet them, his expression grim but satisfied at the sight of the captured fugitive. "Good work, Moshe," he said, clapping Boaz on his uninjured shoulder, "though I'd prefer civilians didn't engage in armed pursuits." "He came to my home," Boaz replied simply. "Didn't leave me much choice." Rose rushed from the cabin's porch, relief flooding her face at the sight of Boaz. Her eyes widened as she noticed the blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Boaz assured her. "Bullet just grazed me." Thompson nodded to one of his officers. "Get the first aid kit from the cruiser. Let's patch up that arm." As an officer approached with the kit, Thompson turned his attention to Winston, who was now seated in the back of a police car, door open as another officer secured his leg wound with proper bandages. "Raymond Winston," Thompson said, standing over him. "We've been looking for you for quite some time." Winston stared straight ahead, offering no response. "Where's your daughter, Raymond?" Thompson pressed. "Where's Rayleigh?" For the first time, Winston's composure cracked slightly. "Check his car," Boaz suggested suddenly, pointing to the sedan with the flat tire. "Maybe she's in there." Officers immediately moved to the vehicle, searching it thoroughly with flashlights. "Clear," one called after a moment. "No sign of the girl." "She must still be at the bunker," Boaz said, turning to Thompson. "He left her there while he came to deal with me." Thompson nodded grimly. "We need to get a team out there right away." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Thompson. I need a search team assembled immediately to investigate the bunker location provided earlier by Mr. Moshe. Suspect in custody confirms the missing child may be at that location." The radio crackled with acknowledgement as Thompson turned back to Boaz. "We'll head out as soon as we secure the scene here. In the meantime, let's get that arm looked at." Boaz submitted to having his wound cleaned and bandaged, though his mind remained focused on Rayleigh, alone in the bunker. How long had she been by herself? Was she safe? Scared? "We need to go now," he urged as soon as the officer finished bandaging his arm. "That little girl is out there alone." Thompson held up a hand. "We're moving as fast as we can, Boaz. We need to transport Winston to the station first for medical attention and processing." He studied Boaz for a moment, then made a decision. "You and Mrs. Moshe should come to the station too. We'll need your full statements, and the medics there can properly examine your arm." Rose nodded, already retrieving their jackets from inside the cabin. "We'll follow in our truck." As Winston was secured in the police cruiser, Boaz approached Thompson once more. "What about Rayleigh?" "You're sending a team to the bunker right now, right?" "Already en route," Thompson assured him. "Captain Larson is coordinating from the command post. They have the exact coordinates from your map and your earlier guidance. If the girl is there, they'll find her." Though not entirely satisfied, Boaz nodded. At least the wheels were in motion. "Let's go then," he said to Rose. "The sooner we get our statements done, the sooner we can help with the search if needed." Together they climbed into Boaz's truck and followed the procession of police vehicles down the mountain road toward the station in the nearest town, about 30 minutes away. The rain had stopped completely now, and breaks in the clouds revealed a star-strewn sky, the storm having finally moved on. "How did he find our cabin?" Rose asked as they drove. "Did you tell him where we lived?" Boaz nodded grimly. "When he gave me the map, I mentioned I had a cabin up in the mountains, the only one there, and pointed in the general direction. Didn't think much of it at the time. Guess he remembered and decided I was a loose end that needed tying up." "Thank God you went to check the generator," Rose said quietly. "If you'd been asleep when he arrived—" Boaz reached over and squeezed her hand. "But I wasn't. And now he's in custody, and with any luck, Rayleigh will be safe soon too." "That poor child," Rose murmured. "What happens to her after all this?" It was a question Boaz had been pondering himself, but he had no answer as they continued their journey to the police station, following the red taillights of Thompson's cruiser through the dark Alaskan night. The police station was a hive of activity despite the late hour. Officers bustled through the brightly lit hallways, radios crackled with updates from field teams, and the booking area processed Raymond Winston, who maintained his sullen silence as medical personnel tended to his gunshot wound. Boaz and Rose were escorted to a small room off the main corridor, where a nurse examined Boaz's injury more thoroughly before cleaning and re-bandaging it properly. "You're lucky," she commented, securing the bandage with medical tape. "Another inch to the right and it would have been much worse than a graze." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Boaz replied with a wry smile. "His aim was off." The nurse gave him instructions for care and recommended a follow-up with his doctor for antibiotics, then left them with 2 cups of coffee as they waited for Thompson to take their statements. It wasn't long before the sergeant appeared, looking tired but focused. He sat across from them at the small table, a digital recorder and notepad ready. "First, I want to thank you both," he began. Your actions tonight have likely saved a child's life, though we're still working to confirm Rayleigh's location. He pressed a button on the recorder. Now I need you to walk me through everything that happened tonight, starting from when you first noticed Winston at your property. For the next hour, Boaz and Rose provided detailed accounts of the evening's events. Winston's arrival under the pretense of retrieving his map, Rose's call to police, the confrontation, and subsequent chase through the woods. Thompson took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but otherwise allowing them to tell their story uninterrupted. As they concluded their statement, a knock at the door interrupted them. Thompson called for the person to enter, and a young officer stepped inside, his expression eager. "Sergeant, they found her," he announced. "The search team located the bunker exactly where Mr. Mosher indicated, and Rayleigh Winston was inside, alone but unharmed, though it appeared she was drugged to sleep. They're bringing her in now." Relief washed over Boaz, so powerful it left him momentarily light-headed. Rose reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it tight. "Is she all right?" Rose asked, her voice thick with emotion. The officer responded, "She was scared and confused but physically unharmed, according to the initial report. The bunker was unexpectedly well equipped with food, water, and basic amenities. It appears she was drugged and we had to use force to rescue her." Thompson nodded, visibly relieved himself. "Good work. Let me know when they arrive with her." The officer acknowledged the instruction and departed, closing the door behind him. "What happens now?" Boaz asked, turning to Thompson. "With Winston and the girl?" "Winston will be charged with kidnapping, along with assault with a deadly weapon for shooting at you," Thompson explained. "As for Rayleigh, Child Protective Services has been notified. They'll place her in temporary care while they sort out her situation." "Her grandmother?" Rose inquired. "Still hospitalized, from what I understand," Thompson replied. "It might be some time before she's well enough to resume care of her granddaughter." "And no other family?" Boaz pressed. Thompson shook his head. "None that we're aware of at this point. The officers who secured the bunker are also collecting evidence. Might give us more insight into Winston's motives and plans." They were interrupted by another knock, followed by Thompson's radio crackling to life. "Sergeant, the transport with the child has arrived. They're bringing her to medical now for evaluation." "Copy that," Thompson responded, rising from his chair. "I need to oversee this. Would you both mind waiting here a bit longer? There may be additional questions once we've assessed the situation fully." "Of course," Rose agreed. "We want to help however we can." Thompson left them alone once more, and Boaz leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night's events was ebbing, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked softly, studying his face. Boaz sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm thinking about how close this came to ending very differently. If I hadn't gotten lost today, if I hadn't spotted that bunker—" "But you did," Rose reminded him, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe there are no accidents, Boaz. Maybe you were meant to get lost today." The thought was oddly comforting, the idea that some higher power or cosmic design had guided him off his familiar path and toward that hidden bunker exactly when Rayleigh needed to be found. "Or maybe I'm just getting old and my sense of direction isn't what it used to be," he added with a small smile. Rose chuckled, playfully swatting his arm, the uninjured one. "Don't deny our age, dear. It doesn't lie." Her expression grew more serious. "But whether it was divine intervention or just the normal process of aging that led you there, the result is the same. That little girl has a chance now." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually the door opened again and Thompson reappeared. "Would you like to see her?" he asked without preamble. "Rayleigh, I mean. She's been examined by the doctor and given a clean bill of health. She's in our break room now with a social worker." Rose stood immediately. "Yes, we'd like that very much." Boaz followed more slowly, suddenly unsure. Would she even recognize me? She only saw me for a moment before her father took her inside the bunker. You'd be surprised what children notice and remember, Thompson replied, leading them down the corridor. And right now, seeing the people who helped save her might do her some good. They followed Thompson to a small break room that had been hastily converted into a more child-friendly space. Toys from the station's interview room had been brought in, along with blankets and snacks. Sitting at the table with a cup of hot chocolate was Rayleigh Winston. She looked smaller than Boaz remembered, more vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lighting than she had in the forest. Her blue sweater was rumpled, her hair slightly tangled, but her face was clean, and her eyes, though wary, were alert. Beside her sat a woman in professional attire who introduced herself as Ms. Jordan from Child Protective Services. "Rayleigh," Thompson said gently, "these are the people who helped find you, Mr. and Mrs. Mosher." The girl looked up at them, her expression cautious. Her gaze lingered on Boaz, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Though she didn't speak, the corner of her mouth turned up slightly, the ghost of a smile that touched something deep in Boaz's heart. "Hello, Rayleigh," Rose said warmly, taking a seat at the table across from her. "We're very glad you're safe." Rayleigh nodded almost imperceptibly but remained silent, her small hands wrapped around the mug of hot chocolate. "That's a nice sweater," Boaz commented, noticing it was indeed the same blue one she'd been wearing earlier. "Blue is a good color for the forest, helps you blend in with the sky." This observation seemed to interest her. "That's what my dad said," she replied, her voice small but clear. "He said blue is for hiding." The social worker exchanged a glance with Thompson, clearly noting this potential evidence. "Do you like collecting things from the forest?" Boaz asked, recalling how he'd first seen her gathering items into a jar. Rayleigh nodded, a bit more enthusiastically this time. "I found a beetle with spots and some shiny rocks. Dad said I could keep them in my special jar." "I used to collect things in the forest too when I was your age," Boaz told her. "My favorite finds were unusual feathers and interesting leaves." For the first time, Rayleigh's expression brightened genuinely. "I found a leaf shaped like a star." The conversation continued in this gentle vein for a few minutes before Thompson gestured that they should wrap up. The hour was late, and Rayleigh needed rest. As they prepared to leave, Boaz bent down to Rayleigh's eye level. "You were very brave," he told her solemnly, "and now lots of people are going to make sure you're taken care of." Rayleigh's eyes searched his face, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "Is my dad in trouble?" Boaz glanced at the social worker, unsure how to answer, but Rose stepped in smoothly. "The grown-ups are going to sort everything out," she assured Rayleigh. "The important thing is that you're safe now." This seemed to satisfy the girl, who nodded and returned to her hot chocolate. Outside in the hallway, Thompson updated them on what would happen next. "We've identified Winston's car through the registration. Officers are searching it thoroughly for additional evidence. Meanwhile, Ms. Jordan will place Rayleigh in emergency foster care tonight. Tomorrow, they'll start working on a more permanent arrangement until her grandmother recovers." "What did you find at the bunker?" Boaz asked. "Food supplies for at least 2 weeks," Thompson replied. "Basic medical kit, sleeping bags, portable heater, some children's books and toys. Looks like he was planning to keep her there for some time. We also found multiple sets of identification documents for both himself and Rayleigh, probably planning to flee the country eventually." Boaz shook his head, trying to fathom the desperation or delusion that would drive a man to such extremes. "What about her grandmother's condition?" Rose inquired. "How serious is it?" "Pneumonia complicated by pre-existing health issues," Thompson explained. "She's stable but will require extended care and rehabilitation. Could be weeks or even months before she's able to care for a child again." Rose and Boaz exchanged a look, a silent communication born of decades together. "Is there anything else you need from us tonight?" Boaz asked. "It's been a long day." Thompson shook his head. "You're free to go home. We'll be in touch if we need any clarification on your statements." He extended his hand. "Thank you both again. What you did tonight made a real difference." They shook hands and Thompson escorted them to the station's front entrance. Outside, the night sky had cleared completely, stars shining brilliantly in the wake of the storm. Boaz's truck sat waiting in the parking lot, a symbol of their return to normal life after the evening's extraordinary events. As they drove home through the quiet mountain roads, a comfortable silence settled between them for several minutes, both processing the whirlwind of events that had transpired in just 24 hours. Finally, Rose spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "That little girl is going to need somewhere to stay until her grandmother recovers." Boaz glanced at her, recognizing the tone. Rose had been thinking deeply about something. "She'll be in the system," he replied. "Foster care, probably." Rose turned in her seat to face him more directly. What if she didn't have to be? What if we took her in? The suggestion hung in the air between them. Under normal circumstances, Boaz might have been taken aback by such a proposal. They were in their 60s, settled into a comfortable retirement, their parenting days long behind them. And yet somehow the idea didn't seem as outlandish as it should have. "We always wanted a daughter," Rose continued, her voice wistful. "When we were young, after our first son, and with our limited finances, we didn't dare try for another child." Boaz nodded, memories of those early years washing over him, the struggle to make ends meet, the decision to focus their resources on giving Michael the best possible start in life. "It would be temporary," Rose added, "just until her grandmother recovers. But after everything that's happened to her, I can't bear the thought of her being abandoned to the system." Boaz considered this as he navigated a particularly winding section of road. "She practically doesn't know us, Rose, and after what she's been through, it might be hard for her to trust anyone." "I know," Rose acknowledged, "but I would want someone kind to take care of my grandchild if I were in her grandmother's position. Someone who would give her a real home, not just a temporary placement." Boaz found himself nodding slowly, the idea taking root. Their cabin was spacious, with a spare bedroom that had once been Michael's. The surrounding wilderness would provide a perfect environment for healing, fresh air, natural beauty, the simple rhythms of mountain life. "We could talk to the police and social workers about it," he suggested, warming to the possibility. "See if it's even an option. And we'd need to talk to Rayleigh too, see if she'd be comfortable with the arrangement." Rose reached across the console and squeezed his hand. "We'll take it slowly," she agreed. "One step at a time." As they continued their journey home, the conversation turned to practical considerations. What adjustments they might need to make to the cabin, how they could create a space that would feel safe and welcoming to a child who had experienced trauma, the resources they might need to help her process her experiences. The road ahead was uncertain, both literally as they wound through the dark mountain passes and figuratively as they contemplated this unexpected new chapter in their lives. But as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Boaz felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Perhaps his getting lost in the woods had been more than a simple navigational error. Perhaps it had been the first step on a path neither he nor Rose could have anticipated, a path that might now include a little girl in a blue sweater who needed exactly what they had to offer: safety, stability, and the wisdom that comes only with age and experience. The cabin appeared in the distance, a silhouette against the lightening sky. Home. And perhaps soon, home to one more.